A homeless Navy SEAL bought a $99 house. Then his aging K9 uncovered a secret powerful men would kill to hide. 5 days after burying his wife, Ethan Calloway sat alone in a snow-covered pickup beneath the shadow of Wyoming's mountains, homeless, grieving, and haunted by memories he couldn't escape. The former Navy SEAL had nothing left but his loyal German shepherd, Shadow. Then a mysterious note from his late wife led him to a forgotten $99 farmhouse deep in Black Hollow Ridge. What his dog discovered there would uncover a buried secret, expose decades of betrayal, and change countless lives forever. Comment 1 if you'd follow the clue, or 0 if you'd walk away, and tell us where you're watching from. The snow began falling again just before sunset. Large, silent flakes drifted from the steel-gray Wyoming sky, settling across the endless ridges of Black Elk Mountain like a blanket pulled over a sleeping giant. The world beyond the cabin window seemed to disappear inch by inch, swallowed by white. Inside, the silence was worse. Ethan Calloway sat alone at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. 5 days. Only 5 days had passed since Claire's funeral. 5 days since he had stood beneath a frozen January sky and watched the casket disappear into the earth. 5 days since he had lost the only person who had ever managed to bring peace to a man haunted by war. The cabin felt wrong without her. Every room carried traces of her presence. Her reading glasses still rested on the end table beside the couch. Her knitting basket remained untouched near the fireplace. A half-finished grocery list was pinned beneath a magnet on the refrigerator door. Milk, bread, chicken broth. Call pharmacy, simple words, ordinary words. The kind of words that suddenly became sacred when the person who wrote them was gone forever. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Tick, tick, tick. The sound echoed through the cabin like a heartbeat. Or maybe a countdown. Ethan wasn't sure anymore. At 62 years old, he had survived things most people could never imagine. 21 years as a Navy SEAL. Combat deployments across 3 continents. Explosions, ambushes, night raids, friends dying in his arms. He had survived all of it. Yet somehow the empty chair across from him felt more unbearable than any battlefield. A low sigh escaped him. Near the fireplace, Shadow lifted his head. The German shepherd's amber eyes locked onto Ethan. Even now, the old K9 never strayed far. The dog rose slowly and crossed the room. His muzzle was grayer than it had been years ago. His movements carried the stiffness of age, but his eyes remained sharp, always watching, always protecting. Shadow rested his head against Ethan's leg. The familiar weight brought a small measure of comfort. Ethan reached down and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Still here, huh, buddy?" Shadow's tail thumped once, only once. The dog was grieving too. Every evening since Claire's death, Shadow had refused to leave the rocking chair beside the fireplace. The chair where Claire used to sit while reading novels during snowstorms. Sometimes Ethan caught the dog staring at it for hours, waiting, as if expecting her to walk back into the room. The sight broke his heart every time. A gust of wind rattled the cabin windows. The sudden noise made Ethan flinch. Instinct, training. Even after retirement, his body still reacted before his mind did. He hated that. Claire had spent years helping him manage it, years helping him fight the ghosts, the nightmares, the panic, the guilt, especially the guilt. The faces never truly left. Men he'd lost overseas, brothers who never came home, names etched forever into his memory. Some nights he could still hear them. Some nights he woke drenched in sweat, convinced he was back in Afghanistan, back in the mountains, back in the gunfire, back in the chaos. Then Claire would place a hand on his shoulder. Just a touch, nothing more, and somehow the nightmare would lose its power. Now there was no hand waiting in the darkness, only silence and memory. The fire crackled softly. Outside, dusk settled across the mountains. Ethan finally stood. His joints ached. Grief seemed to make every part of him heavier. He crossed the room toward the bookshelf Claire loved. Hundreds of books lined the shelves. Mysteries, history, cookbooks, old westerns. Every book carried fingerprints of the life they'd built together. A life that now felt impossibly distant. His gaze landed on Claire's Bible. The leather cover was worn smooth from decades of use. She read from it every night before bed. Without thinking, Ethan picked it up. The pages opened naturally near the middle. Something slipped loose. A folded piece of paper drifted onto the floor. Ethan frowned. He didn't recognize it. Slowly, he bent down and picked it up. The paper was yellowed, folded carefully. His pulse quickened. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakable. Claire's, for Ethan. The words were written in blue ink. His throat tightened. For a moment he simply stared, then he unfolded it. 6 words greeted him. Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. No date. Just Wixer. Ethan read them again and again. His heartbeat grew louder. Black Hollow Ridge. The name meant nothing to him. He had lived in Wyoming for nearly 15 years. Hunted these mountains. Fished these rivers. Worked countless trails. Yet he had never heard of Black Hollow Ridge. Why would Claire leave this? Why hide it inside her Bible? Why wait until after she was gone? Questions swirled through his mind. Questions without answers. Shadow suddenly stood. The movement startled him. The German shepherd crossed the room and stopped beside the note. His ears lifted. His body grew rigid, focused, alert. The same posture Ethan had seen 1,000 times during deployments. Shadow stared directly at the paper, then at Ethan, then back to the paper. A strange chill traveled down Ethan's spine. What's gotten into you? Shadow whined softly. Not fear, not anxiety. Something recognition. The dog knew something. The thought was ridiculous, and yet Shadow lowered his nose and touched the note gently. Then he sat, watching Ethan, waiting. Outside, darkness swallowed the mountains completely. The storm intensified. Snow hammered the cabin roof. The fire popped loudly, but Ethan barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the 6 words. Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow. For the first time since Claire's death, something pierced the fog of grief. Curiosity, a mystery, a final message. Something Claire had wanted him to find. Something important enough to hide. Something important enough to leave behind. Ethan looked toward the rocking chair. The chair Claire would never occupy again. A painful ache tightened in his chest. What were you trying to tell me? He whispered. The cabin offered no answer, only silence. Then Shadow stood abruptly. The dog walked to the front window. His ears perked, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Not threatening, not aggressive. Warning. Ethan immediately felt it. That old instinct. That feeling that something was changing. Something had begun. He didn't know it yet. But Claire's message would soon lead him into a forgotten valley. Toward a secret buried for decades. Toward danger. Toward betrayal. Toward a truth powerful enough to change his life forever. And at the center of it all would be the one companion who had never abandoned him. Shadow. The old war dog. The last brother standing. The only witness to what was coming next. Outside, snow covered the world. Inside, Ethan folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Then he looked at Shadow. The dog was still staring into the darkness, waiting, as if he already knew where the road ahead would lead. And for the first time in 5 days, Ethan did not feel entirely alone. He had no idea that by this time tomorrow, he would lose the last home he had left. The storm raged through the night. Wind slammed against the cabin walls with enough force to make the old structure groan. Snow piled high against the windows, turning the outside world into a blur of white darkness. Ethan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, memories came. Not of combat this time, of Claire. Claire laughing as she burned pancakes during their first winter together. Claire planting wildflowers near the porch every spring. Claire sitting beside him during the worst PTSD episodes, refusing to leave until the shaking stopped. By 4 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep. Shadow was already awake. The German shepherd sat near the front door, watching the snowstorm through the frosted glass. Ethan poured coffee and stood beside him. "You miss her too, don't you?" Shadow didn't move. The dog's ears twitched slightly. Outside, dawn slowly emerged behind thick clouds, a gray Wyoming morning, cold, silent, unforgiving. The day passed quietly. Ethan shoveled snow from the porch, fed Shadow, split firewood, read Claire's note a dozen more times. Go to Black Hollow Ridge, trust Shadow. The words made no more sense than they had the night before. By afternoon, another storm front was moving across the mountains. The sky darkened early. At exactly 3:17, Shadow suddenly stood. The dog's body stiffened, his gaze locked onto the driveway. A low growl rolled from deep inside his chest. Ethan looked through the window. A black SUV was climbing the snowy road. His stomach tightened. He knew that vehicle. The SUV stopped. The driver's door opened. Brandon Pierce stepped out. Nicole followed a moment later. The sight of them instantly changed the air inside the cabin, like a warm room becoming cold. Brandon was 41, tall, clean-shaven, expensively dressed. The kind of man who always looked as if he were headed to a business meeting, even in a snowstorm. Nicole was similar. Perfect makeup, perfect hair, perfect smile. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Ethan hadn't seen them since the funeral. That had been enough. Shadow moved closer, protective, watching. The knock came a moment later, sharp, impatient. Ethan opened the door. A blast of icy wind entered with them. Brandon, Ethan. Neither man offered a handshake. Neither man smiled. Nicole stepped inside and brushed snow from her coat. Brandon carried a leather briefcase. The sight immediately put Ethan on edge. Nobody carried a briefcase to a family visit. Not in the mountains, not during a storm, not 5 days after a funeral. "Coffee?" Ethan asked. Brandon ignored the question. His eyes swept across the cabin, the fireplace, the furniture, the photographs, everything Claire had loved. Then he placed the briefcase on the kitchen table. A slow feeling of dread began building in Ethan's chest. Shadow's growl deepened. "Control your dog," Nicole said. Ethan didn't answer, because Shadow wasn't growling at random. The old K9 sensed something wrong. Brandon opened the briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of papers, legal documents, notices, contracts, the kind of paperwork Ethan hated. "What's this?" Ethan asked. Brandon took a deep breath. For a brief moment he almost looked uncomfortable. Then the feeling disappeared, replaced by cold professionalism. Before Claire died, she signed several property transfer agreements. Ethan stared at him. The room suddenly felt smaller. "What are you talking about?" "The cabin." Brandon slid a document across the table. "The ownership changed 6 weeks ago." Ethan looked down. His eyes found Claire's signature. His pulse quickened. No, that couldn't be right. Claire had been undergoing treatment 6 weeks ago. She could barely walk some days. She'd never mentioned anything about transferring ownership. "You're lying." "I'm not." Nicole folded her arms. "The documents are legal." Ethan picked up the paperwork. The signatures looked real. Every page carried notarized stamps. Official seals, dates, legal language. His stomach dropped. Claire wouldn't do this. Brandon looked away. For a moment, only a moment. Then he met Ethan's eyes. She did. Silence filled the room. The grandfather clock ticked steadily. Shadow stepped closer, positioning himself between Ethan and the visitors. The movement didn't go unnoticed. Nicole shifted uncomfortably. Brandon ignored it. "You own the cabin now?" Ethan asked quietly. "Yes." The answer landed like a punch. 30 seconds passed. Nobody spoke. Outside, snow battered the windows. Something inside, Ethan was beginning to crack. He looked around the room. The room where he'd spent 15 years with Claire. Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, quiet evenings, storms, arguments, laughter, life. Now suddenly reduced to paperwork. A transaction, a signature. "Why?" Ethan finally asked. Brandon's jaw tightened. The answer came colder than Ethan expected. "Because this place belonged to my mother before she left." The words hung in the air. Nicole watched silently. Shadow never took his eyes off them. My mother never got anything, Brandon continued. Claire got everything. That's not true, isn't it? Anger flickered in Brandon's eyes. Years of resentment, years Ethan hadn't fully seen. My father died when I was young. My mother disappeared. Then Claire shows up and suddenly she's everyone's favorite person. Claire loved you. Maybe. The answer carried bitterness. Doesn't matter now. Ethan looked down at the documents again. His vision blurred slightly. Not from age. Not from exhaustion. From grief. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Not now. Not after Claire. Not after everything. Then Brandon delivered the final blow. You have 24 hours. The words were calm, businesslike, merciless. Ethan blinked. What? You need to leave. The room fell completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear. Nicole slid another paper across the table. Eviction notice. Legal filing. Official. Prepared. Planned. You can't be serious. We are. You'd throw me out? Brandon's face hardened. Legally, you're no longer a resident here. Ethan stared at him, unable to believe what he was hearing. A decorated Navy SEAL. A man who had survived war. A man who had buried his wife 5 days earlier. Being thrown out of his home. Like he was nothing. Like he never mattered. Something dangerous stirred inside him. Not violence, not rage. Something worse. Hopelessness. The same feeling he'd experienced after losing teammates overseas. The feeling that no matter how hard you fought, you still lost. Shadow suddenly stepped forward, his ears flattened, his body lowered, protective, ready. The growl became louder. Brandon took a step back. For the first time all afternoon, he looked nervous. Control him. Ethan placed a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog immediately obeyed, but he didn't stop watching. He didn't stop guarding. He knows, Ethan said quietly. What? He knows exactly what kind of people you are. Nicole rolled her eyes. Brandon grabbed the papers. This conversation is over. He stood. Nicole followed. They headed toward the door. Then Brandon stopped. For one brief second, Ethan thought he might apologize. Thought he might show some humanity. Instead, Brandon turned and delivered the cruelest words Ethan had ever heard. Claire's gone. His voice was flat, emotionless, and with her gone, everything changes. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Brandon continued. You were her husband. A pause, then, you were never my family. The words struck harder than any fist, harder than any explosion, harder than any battlefield memory, because they came from someone Claire had spent decades trying to love. Brandon opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. Snow swirled across the floorboards. Then he and Nicole disappeared into the storm. Moments later, the SUV drove away. Its taillights vanished beyond the trees. Silence returned. Ethan remained standing, motionless, the documents still spread across the table. Shadow pressed against his leg, the old dog sensing everything, understanding more than words could explain. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Finally, Ethan sat down. The weight of it all crashing over him, Claire gone, the cabin gone, the future gone, everything slipping away. His eyes drifted toward the folded note still resting on the table. Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow. The words suddenly felt different, less mysterious, more urgent, almost like a warning, as if Claire had known, as if somehow she had seen this coming. Outside, darkness settled over the mountains. Inside, Ethan sat alone beside the dog who refused to abandon him. 24 hours. That was all he had left. And neither man nor dog had any idea where they would go next. But somewhere beyond the storm, Black Hollow Ridge was waiting. The next morning arrived gray and merciless. Snow covered everything. The mountains, the trees, the road leading away from the cabin. Even the porch Claire had decorated every Christmas seemed buried beneath winter's weight. Ethan stood in the living room one final time. The house was quiet, too quiet. Most of his belongings were already packed into cardboard boxes and plastic storage bins stacked in the bed of his aging Ford pickup. He hadn't slept, not really. Every room had demanded a goodbye. Every photograph, every piece of furniture, every memory. Shadow followed him from room to room. The old German shepherd never strayed more than a few feet away, almost as if he feared Ethan might disappear too. The rocking chair beside the fireplace was the last thing Ethan touched. Claire's chair. He rested a hand on its worn wooden arm. Memories flooded through him. Claire laughing while reading mystery novels. Claire knitting blankets for local veterans. Claire sitting there during snowstorms, sipping tea and watching the mountains disappear beneath falling snow. His throat tightened. You would have known what to do. His voice barely rose above a whisper. The chair offered no answer. Silence. Outside, a vehicle approached. Ethan didn't need to look. Brandon had returned, right on time. Like a banker collecting a debt, the black SUV stopped in the driveway. Shadow immediately moved toward the window. His ears flattened. A low growl emerged again. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. It's okay, but it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. A knock echoed through the cabin. Brandon entered without waiting. Nicole followed behind him. Neither bothered removing their expensive winter coats. Neither looked sad. Neither looked guilty. Instead, they looked impatient, as though Ethan's grief had become an inconvenience. Brandon glanced around the room. You finished packing? Ethan stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. The answer seemed to satisfy him. Nicole checked her watch. We have contractors arriving tomorrow. Ethan said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Brandon handed him an envelope. Forwarding information. Ethan accepted it without opening it. The younger man hesitated. For a split second, Ethan thought he saw uncertainty, regret, maybe even shame. Then it vanished, hidden beneath pride, the same pride that had destroyed better men. Good luck, Ethan. The words sounded hollow, empty, like a stranger reading from a script. Ethan simply nodded. Shadow stared at Brandon until he finally left. The SUV disappeared down the mountain road. Gone. Just like that. The cabin no longer belonged to him. 15 years reduced to paperwork. Ethan grabbed the final box, walked through the front door, and never looked back. The truck's engine struggled in the cold. After several attempts, it finally roared to life. Shadow climbed into the passenger seat. The dog settled quietly. Watching, waiting, Ethan drove away. The cabin vanished behind a curtain of falling snow. A chapter of his life closed forever. The mountains stretched endlessly ahead, white, silent, beautiful, and lonely. By afternoon, the storm worsened. Visibility dropped. The highway became a ribbon of ice winding through frozen valleys. Ethan drove without destination, without plan, without purpose. The envelope Brandon had given him remained unopened on the dashboard. Several times he considered throwing it out the window. Instead, he ignored it. The hours passed. Eventually, the fuel gauge dropped lower, then lower still. Reality forced itself into his thoughts. He had less than $900 in his bank account. Claire's medical bills had consumed much of their savings. He was living primarily on his veteran pension. Enough to survive, not enough to start over. Certainly not enough to buy another home. Darkness arrived early. Winter always stole daylight in Wyoming. By 6 o'clock, the world was black. Snow continued falling. The truck heater struggled. Cold seeped through the doors. Ethan finally pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop outside Sheridan. The place glowed beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Semi-trucks lined the lot. Their engines rumbled like distant thunder. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized he had nowhere else to go. The realization hurt. More than he expected. More than combat. More than physical pain. Because homelessness wasn't a single event. It was a truth. A label. One he never imagined wearing. He bought coffee, a sandwich, a can of dog food, then returned to the truck. Shadow ate first. Ethan barely touched his own food. The truck's interior felt smaller than ever. The seat wouldn't recline fully. The windows rattled in the wind. Snow tapped against the glass, a reminder of how vulnerable they were. By midnight, temperatures dropped below zero. Shadow climbed onto the seat, pressing his body against Ethan, sharing warmth. The same way he had done during deployments years earlier. The dog remembered. Military working dogs never forgot. Ethan rested a hand on Shadow's back. Good boy. The dog's tail moved slightly. Outside, the storm intensified. Inside, exhaustion finally claimed Ethan. Sleep came, and with it the nightmares. The desert gunfire, dust, the explosion, the screaming. A teammate named Connor, 26 years old, bleeding in Ethan's arms, asking for help, asking not to die. The memory hit with full force. Ethan jerked awake, gasping. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the freezing temperature. His pulse thundered. The truck. He was in the truck. Not Afghanistan, not Iraq, not Syria. The truck, the parking lot, the storm. Reality slowly returned. Shadow was already awake. The German shepherd had climbed halfway onto Ethan's lap, pressing against him, grounding him, bringing him back, the way Claire used to. Ethan buried his face in the dog's neck. For several minutes, neither moved. The moment passed. The panic faded. The memory retreated. But the emptiness remained. Morning arrived beneath another blanket of snow. The truck stop felt colder, harsher, more permanent. Ethan hated that feeling. He drove into town, spent the day at a public library, charging his phone, reading maps, searching property listings. Anything remotely affordable. Everything was impossible. Tiny apartments, run-down trailers, old cabins, nothing within reach. Hours passed. Then something strange happened. While scrolling through county auction listings, Ethan noticed Shadow suddenly sit upright. Alert, focused. The dog's eyes locked onto something. Ethan frowned. What is it? Shadow wasn't looking out the window. He wasn't watching people. He wasn't tracking movement. He was staring directly at the folded note lying beside Ethan's laptop. The note, Claire's note. The dog stood, walked over, placed his nose against it, then looked directly at Ethan. A single sharp bark escaped him. Ethan froze. The same thing had happened at the cabin. Again. The note. Always the note. Slowly he unfolded it. Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow. Nothing else. Yet Shadow refused to stop staring, as if the paper contained more than words, as if it carried instructions only he understood. Then Ethan noticed something. A tiny mark in the lower corner, so faint he'd never seen it before. A small handwritten symbol, not a letter, not a number, a county seal, an old Wyoming land management stamp. His pulse quickened. He turned back to the auction listings, typed in one phrase, Black Hollow Ridge. The search returned a single result. One property, unsold, abandoned, county-owned, auction price, $99. Ethan stared at the screen. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Shadow sat beside him, watching, waiting. The old dog seemed almost pleased, as if he'd been trying to guide Ethan here all along. Outside, snow continued falling across Wyoming. Inside the library, Ethan looked from the screen to the note, then back again. For the first time since losing Claire, a path forward appeared. It wasn't much, just an abandoned property buried somewhere in the mountains. But it was something, and sometimes something was enough. Ethan looked down at Shadow. The dog met his gaze calmly, steady, certain. Almost as if Claire's final message had never really been for Ethan. Almost as if it had been left for Shadow. And Shadow had been leading him exactly where he needed to go. Toward Black Hollow Ridge. Toward the $99 property. Toward a mystery neither of them yet understood. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared at the screen. The county auction listing looked ordinary. No dramatic description, no photographs meant to impress buyers, just a few dry facts. Property number, BH17. Location, Black Hollow Ridge. Status abandoned. Condition uninhabitable. Sale price, $99. As is, no warranty, no refund. Most people would have closed the listing immediately. Ethan almost did. Then he glanced at Claire's note. Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow. The words seemed to carry more weight now. The location was real, not a memory, not a code, not a dying woman's confusion. It was a place. a specific place, a destination, and somehow Claire had wanted him there. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with winter. Shadow nudged his arm. The German shepherd's tail moved once, not excited, not playful, certain. The old dog seemed unusually focused, as though they were finally moving in the right direction. Ethan opened the auction details. The property had been listed for nearly 11 months. No bidders, no interest, no inspections, nothing. That alone was unusual. Even abandoned land usually attracted someone. Developers, hunters, investors, curious locals, someone. But not this place. A small map appeared on the screen. Black Hollow Ridge sat nearly 70 miles west of Sheridan, deep in a forgotten valley surrounded by mountains. There were no nearby towns, no major roads, only old logging trails and seasonal routes. The isolation practically jumped off the screen. "Why there, Claire?" He whispered the question aloud. No answer came, only the quiet hum of the library, the snow falling beyond the windows, and Shadow watching him patiently. By late afternoon, Ethan had made his decision. He purchased the property online, $99, plus a processing fee. The entire transaction took less than 3 minutes. Years of military operations, countless missions, thousands of life-altering decisions. Yet somehow clicking that final confirmation button felt strangely significant. The screen displayed, "Congratulations, property transfer initiated." Ethan leaned back. A small laugh escaped him. Not because anything was funny, because the absurdity finally caught up with him. A month earlier, he had owned a mountain cabin. Now he owned a $99 abandoned property in a valley he'd never heard of. Life had a strange sense of humor. Shadow barked softly, as if approving the purchase. The next morning, Ethan drove west. The highway cut through endless Wyoming wilderness. Snow-covered peaks stretched across the horizon. Frozen rivers wound through valleys below. Cloud shadows moved slowly across the mountains. The landscape felt timeless, beautiful, lonely. The farther Ethan drove, the fewer vehicles he saw. By noon, he reached a tiny mountain town called Cold Creek. Calling it a town felt generous. There was a diner, a gas station, a feed store, and a church. That was about it. The diner looked inviting. A faded neon sign buzzed above the entrance. Hot coffee, open daily. Ethan parked beside a snow-covered pickup truck and headed inside. Warm air greeted him immediately. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee filled the room. Older ranchers occupied several booths. Most turned briefly to look at the newcomer, then returned to their meals. Small town Wyoming. People noticed everything, said very little. Ethan found a booth near the window. Shadow settled beside him. Several customers smiled at the sight of the aging German shepherd. One elderly rancher tipped his hat toward the dog. "Beautiful animal. Thank you." "Military?" "Ethan, so was mine." The rancher smiled sadly, the kind of smile veterans shared. One built from understanding. No explanation required. A waitress named Donna refilled Ethan's coffee 3 times before eventually asking where he was headed. Black Hollow Ridge. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped. Forks paused. Several heads turned. Even Donna blinked. "You serious?" "That's the plan." Silence followed. Then one rancher chuckled. Another shook his head. Finally, the elderly man spoke again. "Bought the old place?" Ethan frowned. "The old place?" "The house." The rancher leaned back. "Only property out there." Ethan's curiosity deepened. "You know it?" The man laughed. "Everybody knows it." That wasn't reassuring. Donna set down the coffee pot. "People call it the dead man's place." The nickname hung in the air. Not one person smiled. Not one person looked amused. Ethan had spent enough time reading people to recognize genuine discomfort. This wasn't local gossip. This was something else. What happened there? The rancher exchanged glances with the others. Nobody seemed eager to answer. Finally he shrugged. "Depends who you ask." Ethan waited. The man lowered his voice. "Owner disappeared 20 years ago." A pause. "Some say he walked into the mountains during a storm." Another pause. Others say he found something he wasn't supposed to find. What kind of something? No idea. The rancher shook his head. Nobody does. The mystery only grew. Donna folded her arms. All I know is nobody stays there. What does that mean? Means exactly what it sounds like. Her expression hardened. People buy it, then leave. Every time. Ethan looked around the diner. Nobody disagreed. Nobody laughed. The room felt oddly serious, as though everyone shared a secret they couldn't explain. A younger man sitting near the counter finally spoke. My cousin bought it 7 years ago. What happened? Stayed 2 weeks. The man stirred his coffee. Packed up one night and never came back. Why? The man shrugged, said he kept hearing things. Ethan almost smiled. Ghost stories. Every small town had them. The difference was that nobody in the diner seemed interested in dramatics. If anything, they seemed reluctant to discuss it. That bothered him more. Shadow suddenly lifted his head. The dog was staring through the diner window, toward the mountains, toward the west, toward Black Hollow Ridge. His ears stood tall, alert, focused, the same way they had when Ethan first discovered Claire's note. The old rancher noticed. Looks like your dog already made up his mind. Ethan followed Shadow's gaze. Snow-covered peaks rose in the distance, beautiful, cold, mysterious. Something waited out there. He could feel it. Hours later, he finally left Cold Creek. The road west narrowed quickly. Pavement became gravel. Gravel became snow-covered dirt. The mountains closed around him, towering walls of stone and pine. Civilization disappeared behind them. The truck climbed steadily higher. Eventually, Ethan reached an old county marker, Black Hollow Ridge population. Unknown, the sign leaned sideways. Weathered, neglected, almost forgotten. Beyond it lay a narrow valley, and there in the distance sat the property. The first glimpse stopped Ethan cold. The farmhouse stood alone beneath the mountains, a dark silhouette against endless white snow. Its roof sagged. One side of the porch had partially collapsed. Several windows were boarded shut. The barn nearby leaned dangerously, half buried beneath drifts. The entire property looked abandoned by time itself, a place the world had forgotten, a place waiting to disappear. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. This is what $99 buys. Shadow pressed his nose against the window, watching, interested, almost eager. The truck rolled slowly forward. The closer they got, the stranger the place felt. Not frightening, not threatening, just isolated, completely cut off from everything. No neighboring houses, no power lines, no traffic, no sign of life. Only wilderness, only mountains, only silence. The truck finally stopped. The engine died. The world became perfectly still. Ethan stepped outside. The cold hit immediately, sharp and clean. Snow crunched beneath his boots. The farmhouse loomed ahead. Weathered wood, broken shutters, years of neglect. Yet something about it felt familiar. Not because he'd seen it before. Because Claire had somehow known it existed. That thought refused to leave him. Shadow jumped down from the truck. The dog landed in the snow. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of investigating the house, instead of exploring the barn, instead of staying near Ethan, Shadow immediately turned toward the forest, the thick pine woods bordering the property. The dog's posture changed, focused, purposeful, almost urgent. He took several steps toward the trees, stopped, looked back at Ethan, waiting. Ethan felt the same chill again, the same feeling he'd experienced when finding Claire's note, the same feeling he'd felt in the diner. The feeling that invisible pieces were beginning to connect. Shadow barked once, then headed toward the forest edge, not wandering, leading. Ethan watched him disappear between the snow-covered pines. A strange thought crossed his mind. Maybe Claire hadn't sent him to the farmhouse. Maybe she'd sent him to whatever Shadow was looking for. And somewhere beyond those trees, the first real answer might finally be waiting. The winter sun was already sinking behind the mountains. Long shadows stretched across the snow-covered valley. The abandoned farmhouse stood silent behind Ethan. The forest stood ahead, dark, ancient, waiting. Shadow paused at the edge of the trees. The German shepherd looked back over his shoulder, watching Ethan, waiting for him to follow. The behavior wasn't normal. After 10 years together, Ethan knew every habit the dog possessed. Shadow was disciplined, protective, intelligent, but this felt different, purposeful, almost deliberate, as though he had been following instructions. Ethan grabbed his heavy coat and flashlight from the truck. The cold bit immediately, a sharp Wyoming cold that seemed to slice through layers of clothing. Snow crunched beneath his boots. Shadow moved ahead, not running, not wandering, leading. The forest swallowed them within minutes. Towering pines blocked the fading light. Branches heavy with snow hung overhead. The world became quiet, almost unnaturally quiet. No birds, no wind, only the soft rhythm of footsteps. The farther they traveled, the stranger Ethan felt, not afraid, alert. Years of military training had taught him to trust instinct. Something about this place felt important. Shadow continued, moving steadily. Every so often he stopped, checked to make sure Ethan was still behind him, then continued. The dog seemed to know exactly where he was going. After nearly 20 minutes, the forest opened slightly. A small clearing appeared. Shadow immediately became excited. His pace quickened. The dog crossed the clearing and stopped beside a large fallen pine tree. Then he began digging. Snow flew in every direction. Ethan frowned. "Find something?" Shadow kept digging. The dog ignored the question. Within seconds, his paws were uncovering frozen earth beneath the snow. Ethan crouched nearby, watching, waiting. Several minutes passed. Then Shadow suddenly barked. Once, sharp, alert, his paw struck something solid, metal. Ethan froze. Slowly he brushed away more snow, then more dirt. A rusted object emerged. At first it looked like junk, an old piece of scrap metal. Then he picked it up. His breath caught instantly. A military dog tag, weathered, corroded, decades old, yet still recognizable. Ethan stared at it. His pulse quickened. The chain was broken, the metal worn, but the name remained barely visible. He wiped away dirt with his glove. The letters slowly appeared. His heart stopped. No, the whisper escaped before he realized it. He read the name again and again. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. Thomas Garrett. For a moment, Ethan couldn't breathe. Thomas Garrett. The name belonged to a man he hadn't thought about in over 20 years. A Navy SEAL. A teammate. A friend. A man officially declared dead during a training accident in Alaska. Ethan remembered the funeral, remembered standing beside Garrett's wife, remembered carrying the guilt afterward. Another brother lost. Another name added to the growing list. Yet somehow Garrett's dog tag had appeared here, buried beneath snow in Black Hollow Ridge, hundreds of miles away. It made no sense, none. Shadow sat beside him, watching. The dog seemed unusually calm now, as if finding the tag had been his goal all along. Ethan turned the tag over. Something else caught his eye. Attached to the broken chain was a small brass key, old, heavy, different from the military tag. The key looked ancient, handmade, its surface covered in age and tarnish. Ethan stared at it. A dog tag, a key, a dead teammate, hidden beneath the snow. The mystery deepened instantly. "What were you doing here, Tom?" The question vanished into the forest. No answer came, only silence. The same silence that had followed him since Claire's death. But now something else had joined it. Questions. Dozens of questions. Why had Garrett's dog tag ended up here? How did Claire know about Black Hollow Ridge? Why had Shadow led him directly to this spot? And what did the key open? The sun dipped lower. Darkness approached quickly. Reluctantly, Ethan stood. He slipped the tag and key into his pocket. "We'll come back tomorrow." Shadow rose immediately. Mission accomplished, at least for today. The hike back felt different. The forest no longer seemed empty. Instead, it felt full of hidden things, secrets, stories, forgotten history. The farmhouse came into view just as night settled over the valley. From a distance, the place looked almost haunted. the broken porch, the dark windows, the sagging roof. Yet Ethan felt strangely attached to it already. It was the first place he'd belonged since losing Claire, the first place connected to her final message. Inside, the farmhouse proved worse than expected. The front door barely closed. Several windows were cracked. The kitchen ceiling showed water damage. Dust covered nearly every surface. But there was still a wood stove. And where there was fire, there was hope. An hour later, flames crackled inside the stove. Warmth slowly spread through the main room. Shadow stretched out near the fire, exhausted, content. Ethan sat at the old kitchen table. The dog tag rested before him. Beside it lay the brass key. He couldn't stop staring at them. The connection to Thomas Garrett haunted him. Back during his SEAL years, Garrett had been one of the strongest men Ethan ever knew. Smart, fearless, loyal, the kind of teammate everyone trusted. His death had shocked the entire unit. The official report claimed exposure and severe weather during a remote training exercise. Case closed. End of story. Except now, his dog tag had appeared here, and somehow Claire knew enough to send Ethan directly to Black Hollow Ridge. The pieces refused to fit together. A sudden gust rattled the farmhouse walls. The old structure groaned. Shadow lifted his head. His ears twitched, then relaxed. Nothing. Ethan smiled slightly. The dog remained on duty even in retirement. Years of training never disappeared. Hours passed. Snow continued falling outside. The valley became trapped beneath another winter storm. At midnight, Ethan finally unrolled his sleeping bag near the stove. The warmth, wonderful. The exhaustion, even better. Yet sleep refused to come. His mind kept returning to the same questions. Claire, Garrett, the key, Black Hollow Ridge. Eventually, he drifted into restless dreams. Morning arrived beneath clear skies. The storm had passed. Sunlight reflected brilliantly off fresh snow. The valley looked almost beautiful, almost peaceful. Shadow was already awake, standing by the door, watching the forest waiting. Ethan followed his gaze. The same section of woods, the same direction. The dog whined softly, then pawed at the door, not asking to go outside, insisting the difference mattered. Ethan opened the door. Shadow bolted forward, straight toward the forest. Straight toward yesterday's clearing. The urgency startled Ethan. He grabbed his coat and followed. The dog moved faster this time. Confident, focused. Within minutes, they reached the fallen pine tree again. But Shadow didn't stop. Instead, he continued deeper, past the clearing, past a frozen creek, past towering pines. The forest thickened around them. Then Ethan saw it. Something unnatural, something hidden, a narrow trail, almost invisible beneath the snow, yet clearly man-made. Shadow followed it without hesitation. Ethan's pulse quickened. The trail climbed higher into the mountains, twisting through the trees, leading somewhere important. Half an hour later, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. And there, partially hidden among the trees, stood something unexpected, an abandoned firewatch tower. Old, weather-beaten, forgotten. The structure leaned slightly, its windows broken, its stairs coated with snow. Yet something about it felt significant. Shadow immediately sprinted toward it, then stopped, not at the tower itself. At the ground beneath it, the dog began scratching furiously. Snow exploded beneath his paws. Ethan hurried forward, his heart pounding. The old brass key felt heavy in his pocket. The feeling returned. The same feeling he'd experienced since finding Claire's note. The feeling that every answer was drawing closer and, buried somewhere beneath the snow, something was waiting for them. Something hidden. Something important enough for Claire to risk everything. Something connected to a dead Navy SEAL. And maybe, just maybe, something powerful enough to explain why Shadow had led him here. The wind swept across the ridge. Snow drifted around the abandoned firewatch tower like ghostly waves. Shadow continued digging. His paws tore through packed snow and frozen dirt with remarkable determination. Ethan knelt beside him. His breath formed clouds in the cold air. For several moments, all he could hear was the scraping of paws and the distant groan of winter wind moving through the pines. Then shadow struck metal. A sharp clang echoed beneath the tower. Both man and dog froze. Ethan brushed away more snow. A dark surface emerged. Not rock, not debris, metal, old metal. His pulse quickened. The object grew larger with every handful of snow removed. Soon a rectangular outline became visible. A steel hatch, heavy, industrial, hidden beneath decades of neglect. For a long moment, Ethan simply stared. The hatch looked deliberate, designed to remain unseen, designed to survive. The brass key suddenly felt heavier inside his pocket. Slowly, he reached down and cleared the remaining snow. A rusted lock sat near one corner, old weathered waiting, the exact size of the brass key. No way. The words escaped before he realized it. Shadow sat beside him, watching calmly, as if he had expected this all along. Ethan pulled the key from his pocket. The old brass surface gleamed faintly beneath the winter sun. His hand hesitated. Part of him still expected this to be coincidence. Another part knew it wasn't. Nothing about the last few days felt accidental anymore. He inserted the key. The fit was perfect. For a moment the lock resisted. Then came a loud click. The sound echoed through the forest. The lock opened. Ethan exchanged a glance with Shadow. Neither moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Ethan grabbed the steel handle. The hatch was heavy. Years of snow and ice had practically fused it shut. Muscles strained. The metal groaned. Finally it began to move. Cold air rushed upward from the darkness below. A staircase appeared. Concrete steps descending deep underground. The sight sent a chill through Ethan's spine. The bunker wasn't small. It wasn't improvised. It had been professionally built, and somebody had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. Shadow stood, immediately, tail low, ears alert, ready. Ethan switched on his flashlight. The beam disappeared into darkness. Then he started down. One step at a time, the air grew colder, stiller, older. Dust floated through the flashlight beam. The scent of metal and aged concrete filled the narrow passageway. After nearly 30 steps, the staircase ended. A steel door waited at the bottom. Unlike the hatch above, this door stood partially open, as if someone had left in a hurry or never intended to return. Ethan pushed it wider. The beam of light swept across a massive underground room. His breath caught. The bunker stretched farther than expected, much farther. Concrete walls, industrial lighting fixtures, storage shelves, metal cabinets, wooden crates, everything covered by decades of dust, yet remarkably preserved. The place felt frozen in time, a forgotten world beneath the mountains. Shadow moved carefully beside him, every sense alert. The dog inspected the room while Ethan stood motionless, trying to process what he was seeing. Military storage crates occupied one wall. Maps hung on another. Filing cabinets lined the far corner, some still locked, others slightly open. The entire bunker looked like an operations center, abandoned years ago. And somehow Claire had known it existed. That thought refused to leave him. He moved deeper inside. Dust coated the floor, no footprints, no signs of recent visitors. Whatever secrets this place held had remained untouched for a very long time. A large wooden desk sat near the center of the room. Several boxes rested on top. Folders, photographs, documents. The flashlight beam moved slowly across them. Then Ethan froze, his heart skipped. One photograph sat near the top of the pile. A familiar face stared back at him. Claire. For a moment the world disappeared. The bunker, the mountains, the cold, everything. Only Claire remained. Ethan picked up the photograph with trembling hands. His wife stood beside a group of people, much younger, perhaps 30 years old, smiling beneath a bright summer sky. Behind them stretched rolling Wyoming hills. The photograph had clearly been taken long before she met him. Yet there she was, inside a bunker hidden beneath Black Hollow Ridge. His pulse thundered. "What were you doing here?" The question hung unanswered. Shadow approached quietly. The German shepherd looked at the photograph. then at Ethan. As if understanding the importance of the moment, Ethan carefully turned the picture over. Words appeared on the back, written in Claire's handwriting. July 1994, Black Hollow Survey Team. The date hit him hard. Nearly a decade before they met. Nearly 30 years ago. Claire had known about this place her entire adult life. The realization shook him. He searched the desk frantically. More photographs appeared. More files. More evidence. Everywhere he looked, Claire's name surfaced. Reports, survey notes, maps, handwritten records, entire folders labeled with her initials. She hadn't simply visited this place. She had worked here, extensively. The discovery felt impossible. For 15 years of marriage, Claire had never mentioned Black Hollow Ridge. Never once. Not a single story. Not a single photograph. Not a single memory. Yet here was undeniable proof. The bunker had been part of her life long before she became his wife. Long before she became Claire Calloway. The question became unavoidable. Why hide it? A sudden bark interrupted his thoughts. Shadow stood near the back wall. The dog had discovered something. Ethan crossed the room. A row of steel filing cabinets occupied the corner. Most remained closed. One drawer sat partially open. Shadow pawed at it. The drawer slid wider. Inside rested dozens of neatly organized folders. Most carried property records, land surveys, ownership documents, government seals. The paperwork looked official, important, complicated. Yet one folder stood apart from the others. Bright red, marked with a warning label. Confidential. Ethan reached for it, then stopped. Instinct whispered caution. Years as a SEAL had taught him to trust that feeling. Something about the folder felt significant, dangerous, like a door that could never be closed again once opened. The same feeling he experienced before entering hostile territory, before uncovering truths people wanted buried. Shadow sat beside him, waiting. The dog seemed unusually calm, certain, the way he always became before making an important decision during deployments. Ethan took a deep breath, then opened the folder. The first page contained a list of names, dozens of them, business owners, developers, attorneys, surveyors, government officials, some crossed out, some highlighted. At the top appeared a title, Black Hollow Land Acquisition Project. Below it sat another phrase, Internal Investigation. Ethan frowned. None of it made sense yet. But one thing became immediately clear. This bunker wasn't hiding treasure. It was hiding information. And information could be far more dangerous, especially when powerful people wanted it forgotten. He closed the folder slowly. Questions multiplied by the minute. Who built the bunker? Why had Thomas Garrett's dog tag led him here? What exactly had Claire been investigating? And most importantly, why had she waited until after her death to reveal any of this? The winter sun was already fading outside. Darkness would soon return to the valley. But Ethan couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the first real answers were finally beginning to appear. Somewhere inside this forgotten bunker, Claire had left a trail. And for the first time since losing her, Ethan felt closer to her than he had in months. Yet he couldn't shake one unsettling thought. If Claire had hidden all of this for 30 years, then whatever she had discovered must have been important enough to protect. Important enough to bury. Important enough to risk everything. And somewhere inside the bunker, the reason was waiting. The underground silence felt heavier now. Not empty, occupied. Every shelf, every cabinet, every file, every forgotten document seemed to whisper fragments of a story Ethan had never been told. The beam of his flashlight drifted slowly across the room. Dust danced through the light. Shadow remained beside him, alert, patient. The old German shepherd seemed strangely comfortable here, as if some instinct told him they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Ethan carried the red folder back to the desk. His pulse remained elevated. Years of military service had taught him how to recognize danger. Not physical danger. Something else. The danger of truth. The danger of discovering something that could never be unknown again. He opened the folder completely. Inside were hundreds of pages, maps, photographs, government reports, property records, investigative notes. The deeper he looked, the more unsettling the picture became. Black Hollow Valley had once belonged to dozens of independent ranching families. Many of them had lived there for generations. Small cattle operations, family farms, modest properties passed down through bloodlines. Then something happened. The documents showed it clearly. Over a period of nearly 20 years, ownership slowly changed. Land disappeared. Properties were seized. Titles transferred. Boundaries altered. Families vanished from county records. The process had been gradual, quiet, almost invisible. But when viewed together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone had been stealing the valley, legally, or at least making it appear legal. Ethan sat back slowly. "What the hell did you uncover, Claire?" Shadow lifted his head at the sound of her name. The dog still reacted whenever Ethan spoke it, as if he too missed her. As if he still expected her to walk through a doorway carrying one of her warm smiles. Ethan swallowed hard, then continued reading. A photograph slipped loose from the folder. It landed face up on the desk. Claire again. Only this time she looked different. Younger, determined, focused. Standing beside a group of investigators. Survey equipment surrounded them. Maps spread across the hood of a truck. One man stood beside Claire. Tall, broad shoulders, military posture. Ethan's breath caught. Thomas Garrett, the same man whose dog tag Shadow had found. The same man officially declared dead decades ago. Yet there he was, alive, standing beside Claire. The photograph was dated 2 years after Garrett's reported death. Ethan stared at it. The impossible image refused to make sense. His mind immediately searched for explanations. A mistake, a look-alike. Misprint. But deep down he already knew. The face was unmistakable. It was Garrett, which meant the official story surrounding his death had been false or incomplete. Either possibility raised terrifying questions. Ethan dug deeper into the folder. Then he found a sealed envelope. His hands froze instantly. Across the front appeared familiar handwriting, Claire's. The sight hit him harder than expected. For a moment he simply stared, his wife's handwriting. The same handwriting that filled grocery lists, birthday cards, Christmas notes. The same handwriting that had written the message hidden in her Bible. "Go to Black Hollow Ridge. Trust Shadow." The envelope was addressed to him. "Ethan, if you find this, everything has changed." His chest tightened. Slowly he opened it. Inside rested several pages folded neatly together. The first line nearly stopped his heart. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then Shadow succeeded." Tears instantly blurred his vision. He closed his eyes. For a moment he could almost hear her voice. Warm, gentle, certain. The way she always sounded when she knew something he didn't. He continued. "There are truths I kept from you. Not because I didn't trust you, because I loved you, and because some truths are dangerous. Dangerous enough to destroy lives. Dangerous enough to get people killed." Ethan's pulse quickened. The words felt different now. Not dramatic, not exaggerated. Honest. Claire had never been prone to melodrama. If she described something as dangerous, she meant it. He kept reading. 30 years ago, I worked as part of a federal land investigation. We uncovered evidence of a massive fraud operation that targeted ranchers throughout Wyoming. Entire families lost land they legally owned. Records were altered. Officials were bribed. Evidence disappeared. The people responsible were powerful. Some still are. The bunker became our insurance policy. A place to hide copies of everything. A place nobody would ever think to search. Ethan stared at the pages. The room suddenly felt smaller. The bunker around him transformed from mystery into purpose. This wasn't a treasure vault. It was a vault of evidence. A time capsule protecting the truth. The letter continued. Thomas Garrett wasn't who you believed he was. He wasn't killed. He volunteered to disappear. He knew the investigation had become compromised. He helped protect the evidence. He helped build this bunker, and he spent years ensuring nobody found it. Ethan lowered the pages. His mind reeled. Garrett had been alive, not only alive, working alongside Claire, protecting whatever secrets this place contained. The revelation shattered decades of assumptions. Then came the next paragraph. The most dangerous people never stopped searching. Some believed the evidence had been destroyed. Others suspected it remained hidden. They were right. And if they ever learned someone found it, they would come. The words seemed to echo through the bunker. They would come. A chill crept through Ethan. The letter suddenly felt less like a farewell, more like a warning. He continued reading. I never told you because I wanted you to have peace. After everything you survived overseas, after the nightmares, the losses, the PTSD, you deserved a life free from this burden. But now I need you. I need the man I know you are. The man who never quits. The man who never leaves people behind. Ethan's throat tightened. Claire had understood him better than anyone. Even when PTSD made him withdraw. Even when survivor's guilt consumed him. Even when he struggled to believe he deserved happiness. She had never stopped believing in him. The final section of the letter appeared. The truth hidden here belongs to the people who lost everything. One day it must come into the light. That choice is yours now. Trust Shadow. Trust your instincts. And trust that I loved you enough to leave you the truth. Always, Claire. The letter slipped slightly in his trembling hands. Silence returned. Deep, heavy, emotional. For several moments Ethan couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. The grief returned, but different this time. Not the crushing emptiness he'd carried since the funeral. Something else. A mixture of heartbreak and purpose. Claire hadn't left him an inheritance. She hadn't sent him to Black Hollow Ridge for money. She had sent him to finish something she couldn't. A mission. The realization changed everything. Shadow approached quietly. The dog rested his head against Ethan's knee. A simple gesture, yet it anchored him, grounded him. The same way Shadow had done countless times during panic attacks and PTSD episodes over the years. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ears. The familiar motion steadied him. You knew, didn't you? Shadow looked up, calm, loyal, faithful. The same dog who had stood beside him through combat zones, nightmares, grief, and loss. The same dog Claire trusted enough to carry her final secret. A sudden realization struck Ethan. Claire hadn't written, "Trust the note, trust the bunker, trust the evidence." She had written, "Trust Shadow." The dog had been the key all along. Not just the guide, the safeguard. The final link in a plan decades in the making. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the mountains. A winter storm approaching. Darkness would arrive soon. Ethan carefully folded Claire's letter, then placed it inside his jacket, close to his heart, where it belonged. The mission was clear now, but another thought lingered, a dangerous thought. If Claire spent 30 years hiding this evidence, then others might still be looking for it. And if someone discovered the bunker had been opened, the valley could become dangerous very quickly. As if sensing the thought, Shadow suddenly stood. The German shepherd turned toward the bunker entrance, ears erect, body tense. Listening, the change was immediate, professional, focused. The same alert posture Ethan remembered from deployments. Something had changed, something outside. Ethan slowly rose to his feet. The silence inside the bunker suddenly felt different, not peaceful, watchful. And somewhere above them, the mountains were no longer empty. Ethan stood motionless inside the bunker. Shadow's posture had changed completely. The old German shepherd was no longer relaxed. Every muscle in his body had tightened. His ears pointed toward the staircase leading to the surface. Listening, watching, waiting. The transformation sent an immediate warning through Ethan's system. For 10 years, Shadow had been his partner. Before that, he had been a military working dog, trained to detect danger, long before humans noticed it. Ethan trusted Shadow's instincts more than his own. And right now, Shadow was telling him something was wrong. Very wrong. The bunker suddenly felt different. Not like a discovery, not like a sanctuary, like a position that might soon be compromised. Ethan quickly gathered the most important documents. Claire's letter, the red investigation folder, several photographs, the image showing Claire beside Thomas Garrett. Anything that seemed essential. The rest would remain where it was for now. He wasn't abandoning the bunker, but military experience taught him one hard lesson. Never stay in one place too long after finding something valuable, especially if others might be searching for it. Shadow released a low growl, soft, controlled, focused. Ethan switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the bunker. Only faint emergency lights remained visible near the ceiling. The silence felt enormous. Then he heard it. A sound, far above, metal. A faint scraping noise. The old hatch. Someone was touching it. Ethan's pulse accelerated instantly. Not panic. Training. The same calm awareness that had carried him through dangerous situations years ago. He moved toward the staircase. Slowly, carefully, every step deliberate. Shadow stayed beside him. The pair climbed upward together. Halfway up, Ethan stopped. Another sound. Voices. Distant, muffled. At least two people. Possibly more. He couldn't make out the words. But he didn't need to. The bunker was supposed to be forgotten. Nobody should have known it existed. Yet, someone was standing above it. The implications were obvious. Someone had noticed. Somehow, Ethan retreated immediately. Back down the staircase. Back into the bunker. The old SEAL instincts that peace had buried beneath years of grief suddenly returned. Not aggression, awareness, assessment, planning. He studied the room, searching for options, a second exit, a ventilation shaft, anything. Then he found it. A narrow maintenance corridor hidden behind several storage shelves. The passage disappeared deeper into the mountain. Shadow immediately moved toward it, as though he already knew. Of course he did. The dog always seemed to know. Ethan grabbed his backpack, the documents, several flashlights, a portable radio. Then he followed Shadow into the darkness. The corridor stretched farther than expected. Concrete walls, dust-covered pipes, emergency lights that hadn't worked in decades. The deeper they moved, the more Ethan realized the bunker had been designed for long-term use. This wasn't a storage room. It was an operational facility, a place built by people expecting trouble, people preparing for the future. The passage eventually ended at another steel door, smaller, hidden. Ethan pushed it open. Cold air rushed inside. The exit emerged halfway down a rocky hillside nearly a quarter-mile from the watchtower. Perfect concealment, perfect escape route. The people above would never find it, not immediately. Ethan stepped outside. Snow drifted across the mountain slopes. Gray clouds gathered overhead, another storm approaching. Then Shadow suddenly froze. The dog stared toward the valley below. Ethan followed his gaze. A black SUV sat near the farmhouse. His farmhouse, the $99 property. His stomach tightened. Nobody should have been there. Nobody. The vehicle was unfamiliar. Dark windows. No visible markings. No license plate visible from this distance. The SUV remained parked beside the barn, waiting, watching. The realization hit hard. This wasn't random. Whoever had searched the watchtower had also located the farmhouse. They were connected. Someone knew enough to follow the trail. Someone was actively searching. The game had changed. By dusk, Ethan reached the farmhouse. The SUV was gone. No tire tracks remained visible beneath fresh snowfall. Yet something felt wrong. Very wrong. Shadow confirmed it immediately. The dog raced toward the front porch, growling, alert. The front door stood slightly open. Ethan never remembered leaving it that way. Slowly he approached, every instinct screaming caution. The door creaked softly in the wind. Inside, the house appeared unchanged, at first. Then he noticed. The kitchen drawers had been opened. The cabinets searched, boxes moved, several belongings displaced. Someone had entered. Someone had looked for something. The realization settled heavily. Claire had been right. The evidence mattered. Enough for strangers to travel into an isolated mountain valley searching abandoned buildings during winter. Enough for someone to risk exposure. Enough for someone to keep hunting after 30 years. Ethan carefully inspected the house. No signs of vandalism, no theft, nothing missing. Only searching. Whoever entered hadn't wanted property, they wanted information. Shadow led him room to room, methodical, focused, the same way he worked during military operations. Then the dog stopped near a window. His ears flattened. A low growl emerged. Ethan moved beside him. Outside stood a man, far beyond the fence line, almost hidden among the trees, watching. The figure remained motionless, then turned and disappeared into the forest. The encounter lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The mountains were no longer empty. Someone was observing them, someone patient, someone careful. That night, Ethan secured every door, every window. The farmhouse suddenly felt less like a refuge, more like an outpost. The storm arrived after midnight. Snow hammered the valley. Wind screamed across the ridge. The old house groaned beneath the pressure. Ethan sat beside the wood stove, unable to sleep. Claire's letter rested beside him. Shadow lay nearby, but even the dog remained awake, listening, waiting. At 2:30 in the morning, Shadow exploded into motion. The German shepherd launched to his feet, barking, loud, sharp, urgent. Ethan reacted instantly. Years of training took over. He extinguished the lantern. Darkness filled the room. Outside, footsteps, not close, not yet. But there, the storm concealed much of the sound. Yet Shadow heard it clearly. Multiple individuals moving through the snow, approaching the property. Ethan moved quietly to the window. A flashlight beam flickered briefly near the barn. Then another. Then another. 3 lights. 3 people at minimum. Maybe more. They weren't lost. They weren't tourists. Nobody wandered through mountain storms in the middle of the night. Not accidentally. The flashlights moved toward the house. Shadow stood beside Ethan. Silent now. Ready. The old canine's eyes never left the darkness outside. Ethan felt something awakening inside himself. Something he hadn't felt since retirement. Purpose. Focus. Determination. Not because he wanted conflict, because someone had targeted Claire's legacy. Because someone had come looking for what she protected. Because once again, people were depending on him. Even if those people were long gone, the flashlights stopped moving. 100 feet from the house, watching, waiting, as though deciding what to do next. Then one light suddenly turned toward the window, directly toward Ethan, directly toward Shadow. The beam lingered, several long seconds, then disappeared. Moments later, the figures retreated into the storm, gone, vanished as quickly as they appeared. The silence returned. But the message was unmistakable. They knew he was here, and now they knew he had found something. Ethan looked down at Shadow. The dog stared toward the darkness, still alert, still guarding, still protecting him after all these years. Outside, the storm swallowed the valley. Inside, Ethan understood a simple truth. The mission Claire left behind was no longer hidden, and whoever wanted the evidence would be back. The certainty settled over Ethan like the storm itself. Outside, snow continued to fall across Black Hollow Ridge. The valley disappeared beneath a swirling curtain of white. The mountains became shadows. The forest became silence. Only the farmhouse remained, a lonely structure standing against winter, and inside it sat a retired Navy SEAL and an aging German shepherd who both understood something important. The next encounter would not end with distant flashlights. The next encounter would be closer, much closer. Morning arrived beneath a gray sky. The storm had passed, but fresh snow covered everything. The valley looked untouched, pristine, beautiful, deceptively peaceful. Shadow was already awake, standing beside the front window, watching. The dog barely moved. His focus never left the tree line. Ethan poured coffee into a chipped mug. His eyes felt heavy. He hadn't slept more than an hour, not because of fear, because his mind refused to stop working. Claire's letter, the hidden investigation, Thomas Garrett, the intruders, the bunker. The pieces continued to assemble themselves into something larger, something dangerous. A sudden knock at the door broke the silence. 3 sharp taps, unexpected. Ethan froze. Nobody should be visiting. Shadow immediately moved into position. Protective, alert. Ethan opened the door cautiously. A woman stood outside, early 40s, heavy winter coat, county sheriff's department vehicle parked behind her. Deputy Rachel Boone. The name appeared on her badge. I heard someone finally bought the old place. Her voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being underestimated. Ethan nodded. I guess that's me. Rachel smiled slightly. Then welcome to Black Hollow Ridge. Shadow studied her carefully. After a few moments, the dog relaxed. A good sign, Rachel noticed. Military dog, former K9. Beautiful animal. She crouched slowly, allowing Shadow to approach first. The German Shepherd sniffed her hand, then stepped back. Approved. Ethan trusted the judgment. Rachel accepted a cup of coffee and stepped inside. The conversation remained casual initially. Road conditions, winter storms, the valley, the isolation. Then her expression changed. You notice anything strange lately? The question immediately sharpened Ethan's attention. What kind of strange? Rachel glanced toward the windows, asking because several ranchers reported unfamiliar vehicles around the mountains. Ethan remained silent. The deputy continued. Dark SUVs. His grip tightened slightly around the coffee mug. Exactly what he'd seen, Rachel noticed. So you have. Ethan told her about the vehicle, the flashlights, the men outside during the storm. Nothing about the bunker, nothing about Claire's evidence. Not yet. Rachel listened carefully. When he finished, her expression grew serious. Those reports started about 2 weeks ago. What reports? People asking questions. She paused. Questions about abandoned properties. The room suddenly felt smaller. Rachel stood. If you see them again, call me. She handed him a card, then lowered her voice. Something feels off. Ethan studied her. The deputy seemed honest, competent, concerned, not curious, concerned. There was a difference. After she left, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't leave the evidence inside the bunker. Not now. Not after the visitors. Not after Rachel's warning. He spent the afternoon organizing the most important documents. Photographs, maps, Claire's records, Thomas Garrett's files, anything that appeared critical. Everything fit inside 2 waterproof cases. By sunset, he was ready. Shadow accompanied him toward the hidden bunker once more. The forest felt different now, more watchful. Every sound carried significance. Every movement drew attention. Years of military training returned naturally. Ethan found himself scanning ridgelines, watching shadows, listening for unnatural sounds. The habits never truly disappeared. The pair reached the watchtower shortly before dusk. The hidden hatch remained untouched. At least visibly, they descended into the bunker, collected the remaining files. Then Ethan discovered something new, a locked cabinet, small, steel. Different from the others, the brass key no longer fit, but another key rested inside one of Garrett's folders. Ethan tried it. The lock opened. Inside sat a video recorder, several hard drives, and one sealed envelope. Claire's handwriting covered the front. Open only if they come. The words sent a chill through him. She had anticipated this. Years ago. Perhaps decades ago. Ethan slipped the envelope into his jacket. He would open it later. Not here. Not now. A sound interrupted his thoughts. Shadow. The dog stood motionless, listening. Then came the growl. Low, dangerous, immediate. Someone was outside. Ethan killed his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the bunker. The growl deepened. Footsteps echoed faintly above. Multiple people again. But this time closer, much closer. The hatch opened. Metal scraped against metal. Voices followed. 3, maybe 4. Flashlights appeared at the top of the stairs. Ethan's pulse slowed. The strange calm returned. The calm that arrived whenever things became dangerous. The calm Claire always recognized. The calm Shadow trusted. Without hesitation, Ethan moved toward the maintenance tunnel. Shadow followed. The pair disappeared into darkness moments before the first intruder reached the bunker floor. Voices echoed behind them. Searching. Investigating. One flashlight beam swept across the room. Another. The intruders had found the bunker, exactly as Claire feared. The maintenance passage carried Ethan deeper into the mountain, then out through the concealed exit. Night had fully arrived. Snow began falling again. The storm returning. The forest became their shield. The men discovered the second exit within minutes. Flashlights appeared behind them, moving through the trees, searching, following. Ethan and Shadow headed toward a narrow canyon leading back toward the valley. The terrain was difficult, steep, icy, dangerous, perfect for slowing pursuers. For nearly an hour they moved through darkness. Snow intensified. Visibility collapsed. The world narrowed to flashlight beams and survival instincts. Then disaster struck. A wooden footbridge spanned a deep ravine ahead. Old, weathered, half buried beneath snow. Ethan stepped onto it carefully. The bridge groaned. Shadow crossed beside him. Halfway across came a terrible cracking sound. The structure shifted. One support beam failed. The bridge lurched violently. Ethan lost footing. The world tilted. Snow exploded upward. The ravine opened beneath him. Then something slammed into his chest. Shadow. The German Shepherd had launched forward. The impact pushed Ethan toward stable boards, just as another section of the bridge collapsed. Wood shattered. Snow fell. The bridge partially gave way. Ethan crashed hard against the remaining structure. Pain shot through his shoulder. But he was alive. A desperate bark echoed nearby. Shadow. The dog had fallen several feet onto a rocky ledge below. Not into the ravine. But hard enough. Far too hard. Ethan scrambled downward immediately. Ignoring pain. Ignoring exhaustion. Ignoring everything. Shadow struggled to stand. One rear leg wouldn't support weight. The dog whined softly. Trying to remain brave. Trying to hide discomfort. The same way military dogs often did. The sight hit Ethan harder than anything else. Not Claire's secrets, not the intruders, not the conspiracy. Shadow, his partner, his family, his last connection to better days. The dog who had slept beside him during PTSD nightmares. The dog who refused to leave after Claire died. The dog who found Black Hollow Ridge. The dog who saved him moments ago. Ethan knelt beside him. "It's okay," his voice trembled. "It's okay, buddy." Shadow licked his hand once. Still trusting. Still loyal, even injured. Flashlights appeared again in the distance. The pursuers continued searching. Time vanished. Ethan carefully lifted Shadow into his arms. The German Shepherd weighed nearly 80 pounds. 10 years ago, it would have been effortless. Now it felt like carrying his entire world. But there was never a question. He wouldn't leave him. Not for anything. Not ever. The storm intensified. Snow hammered the canyon. Wind screamed through the rocks. Visibility disappeared. Step by step, Ethan carried Shadow forward. Hour after hour, the injured dog remained silent, occasionally lifting his head, occasionally checking on Ethan, as though making sure his human was still okay. The loyalty broke something open inside Ethan, something buried beneath years of grief and survivor's guilt. Tears mixed with melting snow. He kept walking, one step, then another, then another. The farmhouse lights finally appeared near midnight, faint, distant, beautiful, hope. Ethan staggered through the door, collapsed beside the stove, still holding Shadow. The dog rested quietly, exhausted, injured, alive. Outside, the storm erased every track, every trail, every sign. But Ethan understood something with terrifying clarity. The people searching for Claire's evidence were no longer guessing. They knew someone had found the bunker, and they would not stop. As Shadow rested beside the fire, Ethan opened Claire's sealed envelope. The first sentence made his blood run cold. If you're reading this, Victor Kane finally knows where to look. The words seemed to freeze the air inside the farmhouse. Outside, the storm continued to rage across Black Hollow Ridge. Wind battered the walls. Snow rattled against the windows. The old house groaned beneath winter's weight. But Ethan barely heard any of it. His attention remained fixed on Claire's letter. Shadow lay beside the wood stove, exhausted, injured, breathing steadily. The sight brought both relief and fear. The old German shepherd was alive, but for the first time since they had met, Ethan had seen him vulnerable. The realization hurt more than he expected. He reached down and gently rested a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog opened one eye, then relaxed again, still trusting him, still refusing to quit. Ethan unfolded the remaining pages. Claire's handwriting continued. Victor Kane was one of the original architects of the land acquisition scheme. He wasn't the public face. He stayed hidden. Others took the blame when investigations began. Others disappeared. Others lost careers. But Victor survived, because nobody ever found enough evidence to connect him directly until now. Ethan continued reading. The evidence inside the bunker proves ownership fraud across nearly 20,000 acres. Families lost ranches. Businesses lost land. Entire communities disappeared. The original records were altered. The copies hidden in Black Hollow Ridge were not. If exposed, the evidence would reverse decades of illegal ownership transfers. Ethan slowly lowered the pages. The implications were staggering. This wasn't simply corruption. This was the theft of an entire valley, a theft that had lasted generations. The final section of Claire's letter appeared. There is one person you must trust, Judge Eleanor Whitaker. She knows the history, she knows the records, and she knows what must happen next. The address was written below, a small mountain town nearly 40 miles away. Ethan folded the letter. The path forward had become clear. By sunrise, he had loaded Shadow carefully into the truck. The dog protested slightly. More pride than pain. Even injured, Shadow wanted to walk, wanted to work, wanted to protect. Ethan smiled despite everything. Easy, partner. The German shepherd settled onto blankets behind the seat. The truck started. Snow still covered the roads, but the storm had weakened. The drive took nearly 2 hours. Mountain roads twisted through canyons and frozen forests. The landscape seemed endless, beautiful, harsh, unforgiving. Eventually, the truck reached a small town called Redstone Crossing. The population sign listed fewer than 800 residents. Main Street consisted of a grocery store, a pharmacy, a diner, a hardware shop, and an old brick building overlooking the town square. Whitaker Legal Consulting. Ethan parked outside. Shadow remained inside the truck, resting, watching. The office door opened before Ethan could knock. An elderly woman stood inside. Silver hair, sharp eyes, perfect posture. She looked less like a retired attorney and more like someone still running a courtroom. "You must be Ethan Calloway." The statement surprised him. "You know who I am?" She smiled faintly. "Claire made sure I would." The answer sent another wave of emotion through him. Even now, even after death, Claire seemed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Judge Eleanor Whitaker led him into a private office. Books lined every wall, land records, legal volumes, historical maps. The room felt more like an archive than a law practice. Ethan handed her Claire's letter. The judge read silently, then nodded. "So she finally sent you. You expected this? I've expected it for years." The calm certainty in her voice was remarkable. She crossed the room and unlocked a cabinet. Inside sat several boxes, each carefully labeled Black Hollow Project, Evidence Archive, Property Recovery. The labels alone told a story. Judge Whitaker returned, carrying a large map. She spread it across the desk. The map displayed the entire Black Hollow Valley. Thousands of acres, mountains, streams, ranches, roads, property boundaries. Then she pointed. "You own this." Ethan frowned. "The farmhouse? No." Her finger moved. "This, the entire valley." Ethan stared. Surely he misunderstood. Judge Whitaker explained carefully. The fraudulent land transfers depended upon a chain of ownership documents. Those documents had been manipulated, but the original records survived. Inside the bunker, and according to those records, the abandoned property Ethan purchased included dormant ownership rights tied to the original Valley Trust. The $99 farmhouse wasn't simply a house. It was the final surviving anchor point of the entire ownership structure. A legal key, a forgotten piece of history. The realization hit slowly, then all at once. The abandoned farmhouse, the mysterious auction, Claire's instructions, the hidden evidence. Everything connected, Judge Whitaker continued. If the records are authenticated, ownership reverts. To me, she shook her head. Not exactly. Relief crossed Ethan's face. The idea of owning an entire valley felt absurd. Judge Whitaker smiled. The ownership belongs to the descendants of the original families. She tapped the map. Hundreds of people. Families who lost everything. Ethan understood immediately. Claire's mission wasn't about making him rich. It was about restoring what had been stolen. The judge's expression darkened. Victor Kane knows that. A silence followed. Then another voice interrupted. A knock sounded at the office door. Deputy Rachel Boone stepped inside. The sight surprised Ethan. The judge looked unsurprised. Rachel removed her gloves. "We've got a problem." The room immediately grew tense. "What happened?" Ethan asked. Rachel placed several photographs on the desk. Security images, vehicles, license plates, men entering and leaving remote properties, including Black Hollow Ridge. "We've been tracking Kane's people for weeks." She pointed to one photograph, a black SUV, the same vehicle Ethan had seen. Rachel continued. "Kane owns several development companies. Officially." The way she said officially explained everything. Judge Whitaker studied the images. "He's accelerating." Rachel nodded. "He knows somebody opened the bunker." Ethan glanced toward the window. The mountains remained visible in the distance. Suddenly they felt much smaller, much more dangerous. The judge folded her hands. "Then we move now." Rachel looked at Ethan. "How much evidence do you have?" "Enough." The answer came without hesitation. Enough to expose the truth. Enough to explain why Claire spent decades protecting it. Enough to make powerful people nervous. For the next several hours they worked, organizing records, digitizing files, cross-referencing ownership documents. The deeper they dug, the larger the fraud appeared. Families had been displaced, businesses destroyed, entire ranching communities erased. Every document reinforced the same conclusion. Claire had been right. The valley had been stolen. By evening, a federal task force had been contacted. Historical property investigators became involved. Several state agencies requested copies. The evidence was finally leaving the bunker, finally entering daylight, exactly as Claire intended. Then came the final surprise. A forgotten folder surfaced from the archive. Judge Whitaker opened it. Her eyes widened. Rachel leaned forward. "What is it?" The judge turned the pages slowly, then looked directly at Ethan. "Incredible." "What?" She slid the file across the desk. Inside rested the original Black Hollow Valley Trust signed decades earlier. Never terminated, never dissolved, and under the trust's contingency clauses, the legal authority to oversee restoration remained with the holder of the final surviving property, the farmhouse owner, Ethan. The room fell silent. Not ownership, responsibility, guardianship, stewardship. The distinction mattered, yet the effect remained astonishing. The $99 farmhouse had become the key to restoring thousands of acres, thousands of lives. The mission Claire left behind was finally reaching its conclusion. Outside, evening settled across Redstone Crossing. Snow glowed beneath the streetlights. Inside the office, Judge Whitaker smiled for the first time all day. "Congratulations, Ethan." He looked up. "For what?" The retired judge folded the trust document carefully. "For becoming the man Claire always knew you were." Ethan glanced toward Shadow, sleeping quietly in the truck outside, then toward the mountains beyond town. The journey had started with grief, then betrayal, then survival. Now it had become something larger. A chance to make things right, a chance to finish Claire's work, a chance to give an entire valley back to the people who deserved it. But somewhere far away, Victor Kane was learning the same truth. And desperate men rarely accepted defeat quietly. The arrest happened 3 weeks later. Federal investigators moved quickly once the evidence from Black Hollow Ridge was verified. Old property records, bank transfers, witness statements, hidden agreements. Everything Claire had protected for decades finally came into the open. The news spread across Wyoming like wildfire. Television stations ran special reports. Newspapers published front-page stories. Communities that had spent years wondering what happened to their land finally had answers. Victor Kane's name appeared everywhere. The once respected developer suddenly became the face of a scandal stretching back generations. For Ethan, the victory felt strangely quiet. There were no celebrations, no triumph, no sense of conquest, only relief. The truth had survived. Claire's mission was complete. Yet every evening he still found himself sitting on the farmhouse porch watching the mountains, missing her, thinking about her, wishing he could tell her everything. Spring had finally arrived. The snow was retreating. Green patches appeared throughout the valley. Streams flowed again. Wildflowers began emerging across the hillsides. Black Hollow Ridge looked different now. Alive, hopeful, a place waking from a long winter. Shadow sat beside Ethan. The German shepherd's injured leg had healed remarkably well. He moved a little slower now, a little more carefully, but his spirit remained unchanged. Every morning he still patrolled the property. Every afternoon he still followed Ethan everywhere. Every night he still slept beside the front door, watching, protecting, loyal as ever. One afternoon, a black sedan appeared at the end of the driveway. Ethan noticed it immediately. Old habits. The vehicle moved slowly toward the farmhouse. Not aggressive, not threatening, hesitant. When the car finally stopped, Ethan felt his stomach tighten. The driver stepped out, Brandon Pierce. For several seconds, neither man moved. The last time Ethan had seen him, Brandon had thrown him out of his home. 24 hours to leave. No compassion, no gratitude, no mercy. The memory remained sharp, the cold, the betrayal, the humiliation, everything. Brandon looked different now. Older, thinner, more tired. His expensive clothes were gone. His confidence seemed gone too. The arrogance that once defined him had disappeared. He stood awkwardly beside the car, almost uncertain, almost ashamed. Shadow immediately moved closer to Ethan. Not aggressive, protective. The old dog remembered. Ethan rose slowly from the porch swing. Neither spoke at first. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Brandon broke it. "I didn't know if you'd let me come." Ethan studied him. "I didn't invite you." "I know." The answer came quietly. A year ago, Brandon would have argued, defended himself, demanded something. Today, he simply nodded. Ethan noticed the difference immediately. Brandon looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like a man carrying a weight he could no longer hide. "What do you want?" The question hung in the warm spring air. Brandon glanced toward the valley. The restored barns, the repaired fences, the land beginning to heal. Then he looked back at Ethan. "The truth." The answer surprised him. Brandon reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully. He removed a newspaper clipping. The headline featured Ethan, the Black Hollow investigation, the recovered valley, the restored ownership records. Brandon placed it on the porch railing. "I know about the money." Ethan said nothing. "I know about the land." Still nothing. Brandon swallowed hard. Then came the words Ethan never expected. "I'm sorry." The apology felt almost unreal. Not because of what was said, because of how it was said. No excuses, no justifications, no conditions. Just regret. Raw, honest, painful. Brandon lowered his eyes. "I lost everything. The confession sounded hollow, defeated. My business failed. A pause. Nicole left. Another pause. The people I thought were friends disappeared. He laughed bitterly. Amazing how fast that happens. Ethan remained silent. Brandon continued. I spent months blaming everyone. The younger man's voice cracked slightly. You, the economy, my father, my mother, my wife. Anybody except myself. The honesty surprised Ethan. Shadow remained beside him, watching quietly. Brandon stared across the valley. I kept asking why my life fell apart. The wind moved through the grass. Birds sang somewhere near the creek. Spring surrounded them. Yet Brandon looked trapped inside winter. Then he reached into his pocket. An envelope appeared. Old, yellowed, carefully preserved. Ethan recognized the handwriting immediately. Claire, his heart skipped. Where did you get that? Brandon looked down. It was in a safe deposit box. His voice softened. The bank contacted me after the estate was finalized. He hesitated. I never opened it. Ethan frowned. Why not? Brandon laughed once. A sad laugh. Because I was angry. The admission hung heavily. I thought she chose you over me. He looked away. So I ignored it. The silence returned. Long, uncomfortable. Then Brandon handed over the envelope. It belongs to you. Ethan stared at it. The familiar handwriting stirred emotions he thought he'd already processed. Carefully, he opened it. Inside rested a flash drive and a note. Play this when Brandon finally comes back. Ethan's throat tightened. Even now, even after death, Claire somehow anticipated everything. They moved inside. The old farmhouse kitchen felt warm and bright. Sunlight poured through newly repaired windows. Shadow settled beneath the table, watching both men. Ethan connected the flash drive to his laptop. The screen flickered. Then Claire appeared. Older than in the bunker photographs. Younger than at the funeral. The version Ethan remembered best. Her smile immediately filled the room. For a moment, neither man breathed. Hello, boys. The familiar voice shattered something inside Ethan. Beside him, Brandon lowered his head. Claire smiled gently. If you're watching this together, then a miracle happened. A pause. And if you're watching it separately, then one of you is being stubborn. Even Brandon laughed softly. The first genuine laugh Ethan had heard from him. Claire continued. Brandon, her expression softened. I know you're angry. I know you think I didn't understand you, but I did. The younger man stared at the screen, unable to look away. You spent years chasing things you believed would make you happy: money, success, status, approval. She paused. But none of those things heal loneliness. The words landed heavily. Claire continued. I also saw something else. Another pause. I saw your greed growing. Brandon winced. The truth hurt, because it was true. I hoped you would change, Claire said quietly. I prayed you would. Her eyes seemed filled with sadness, but I couldn't force it. The room remained completely silent. Even Shadow seemed still. Then came the revelation, the final twist, the thing Ethan never expected. I left Black Hollow Ridge to Ethan because I knew what would happen. Brandon's eyes widened. Claire nodded slightly. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted truth. She smiled sadly. I knew Ethan would choose people over money. I knew he would finish what I started. And I knew you weren't ready. The words struck Brandon harder than any accusation. Because they weren't cruel, they were honest. Claire leaned slightly toward the camera. But here's the important part. Her voice softened. Being wrong today doesn't mean you have to stay wrong tomorrow. Tears filled Brandon's eyes. You can still become the man your father hoped for. The younger man looked away, unable to hide the emotion. Claire smiled one final time. If you're sitting beside Ethan while watching this, she laughed gently, then maybe you're already trying. The video ended. Silence filled the kitchen. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside, spring continued blooming across the valley. Life moved forward. Eventually, Brandon stood, slowly, quietly. I don't deserve forgiveness. Ethan considered the statement, then nodded. No. The honesty surprised both of them. Brandon accepted it. Because it was true. You hurt me, Ethan continued. You hurt Claire. You nearly destroyed everything she spent years protecting. Brandon lowered his head. I know. Another silence followed. Then Ethan surprised himself. That doesn't mean you're beyond saving. Brandon looked up. The words seemed impossible. Ethan glanced toward Shadow. The old German shepherd watched calmly, patiently, loyally. Dogs understood things humans often forgot. Second chances, trust, redemption, the possibility of becoming better. Brandon swallowed hard. What happens now? Ethan looked out the window, toward the valley Claire helped save, toward the future she believed in. Then he answered, that depends on what kind of man you want to become. For the first time in years, Brandon had no response. Only tears, only regret, only the painful realization that everything he lost had been caused by his own choices, and perhaps the beginning of something better. 1 year later, winter returned to Black Hollow Ridge, but it was no longer the same winter. The valley that had once felt forgotten now glowed with life. Fresh snow covered the mountain slopes like a blanket of silver. Smoke curled from chimneys. Lights shined from windows. Voices echoed where silence had once ruled, and at the center of it all stood Ethan Calloway, a man who had arrived broken, a man who had nearly lost everything, a man who no longer stood alone. The old farmhouse still sat on the ridge. But it had changed. The weather-beaten structure had been restored, the roof repaired, the walls reinforced, the porch rebuilt. What had once been known as the dead man's place had become something entirely different. A refuge, a beginning, a home. The sign at the entrance read, Black Hollow Retreat Veterans. Families, working dogs, nobody gets left behind. The words meant something here, because everyone on the property understood what it felt like to be forgotten, to be discarded, to be lost, and to be given another chance. Snow crunched beneath Ethan's boots as he crossed the yard. Several cabins now stood where abandoned sheds once leaned toward collapse. The cabins housed veterans struggling to rebuild their lives. Some battled injuries, some battled loneliness, some carried scars nobody could see. All of them carried stories. Stories Ethan understood, stories he never judged. Near the largest cabin, a group of men worked beside a newly built barn. Laughter drifted through the cold air. One of them waved. Ethan waved back. The simple exchange still surprised him. A year earlier, he avoided people. Now he knew every resident by name. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It happened one conversation at a time, one meal at a time, one act of kindness at a time. The way healing usually happens. Slowly, quietly, honestly. Across the yard, Hank Morrison stood near a tractor, wearing the same weathered cowboy hat he refused to replace. The old Vietnam veteran looked exactly as Ethan expected. Grumpy, stubborn, dependable, the unofficial grandfather of Black Hollow Ridge. Hank noticed Ethan approaching. You planning on working today? Ethan smiled. I worked yesterday. That was yesterday. You're impossible. That's why people like me. Ethan laughed. The old rancher grinned. For a man who claimed not to enjoy people, Hank had become the heart of the community. Everyone sought his advice. Everyone listened to his stories. And somehow, he always seemed to know exactly what someone needed to hear, even when they didn't want to hear it. A sudden bark interrupted them. Both men turned. Shadow came trotting across the snow. The German shepherd moved with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of the injury he suffered protecting Ethan. Yet age and scars had done little to diminish him. Children loved him. Veterans respected him. Visitors often came just to meet him. Stories about the old military dog had spread throughout Wyoming. To many people, Shadow had become a symbol, proof that loyalty still existed, proof that courage wasn't measured by size, proof that some bonds never break. The dog stopped beside Ethan, sat down, and leaned against his leg exactly as he always had. Ethan scratched behind his ears. You checking on me again? Shadow's tail thumped against the snow. Hank shook his head. That dog still thinks you're his responsibility. Maybe I am, the old rancher laughed. Fair point. The retreat continued growing. The original valley restoration project had expanded far beyond anyone's expectations. Families recovered portions of lost property. Community programs returned. Local businesses reopened. The land itself seemed to breathe again. What Claire had protected for decades was finally helping people. Exactly as she intended. That evening, dozens of guests arrived. Veterans, families, neighbors, supporters, residents. The annual winter gathering had become a tradition. Bonfires illuminated the valley. Music drifted through the cold air. Children raced through the snow. The smell of barbecue and coffee filled the evening. For the first time in years, Black Hollow Ridge felt alive. Completely alive. Ethan stood near the largest fire, watching everyone mingle. A strange feeling settled over him. Peace, not happiness alone, something deeper. A quiet acceptance, the kind that arrives after surviving a storm, the kind earned through pain. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Looks like Claire was right. Judge Eleanor Whitaker stepped beside him, still elegant, still sharp, still carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ethan smiled. About what? The retired judge gestured toward the valley. About you. The answer caught him off guard. Judge Whitaker handed him a small package, wrapped carefully, protected from the snow. I've been saving this. Ethan frowned. What is it? It was found among Claire's private files. His heartbeat immediately quickened. The judge smiled softly. I think she wanted you to have it now. The package felt surprisingly light. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at it. The fire crackled nearby. Laughter echoed through the valley. Snowflakes drifted from the dark sky. Everything seemed to slow. Finally, he opened it. Inside rested a single envelope. His name appeared on the front, written in Claire's familiar handwriting. Ethan, if possible, wait until you're happy before opening this. A smile touched his face. Even now she knew him. Even now she was guiding him. Slowly he unfolded the letter. The first words blurred slightly, not because of the snow, because of the tears forming in his eyes. My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, then enough time has passed. Enough healing, enough living, enough believing. I hope you're standing somewhere beautiful. Knowing you, it's probably cold, and shadow is probably nearby. The words brought an immediate laugh through the tears. The description was perfect, Claire continued. When I wrote this, I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of leaving you alone. But then I remembered something. You survived things most people can't imagine. You carried others when you could barely carry yourself. You always found a way forward, even when you didn't believe you could. The letter trembled slightly in Ethan's hands. The bonfire glowed warmly before him. Around him stood people whose lives had changed because he refused to quit. Claire's words continued. I never worried about whether you would survive. I worried about whether you would allow yourself to live. There is a difference. And if you're reading this now, I think you finally understand. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, because she was right. For years, survival had been enough. Now it wasn't. Now there was purpose, connection, hope. The letter continued. I also need to tell you something important. Something I knew before any of this happened. Before Black Hollow Ridge. Before the evidence. Before the mission. Before everything. Another pause. Ethan continued reading. If you're reading this, Shadow found it. I knew he would. A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek. Then another. The simple sentence shattered him. Not because of the mystery. Because of what it meant. Claire trusted the dog. Trusted Ethan. Trusted the future. She believed they would find their way. Even when she wasn't there to guide them. The final lines appeared below. Take care of each other. Keep helping people. Keep choosing kindness. And whenever the snow falls on the ridge, look up. I'll be there. Love always, Claire. The letter ended. The valley seemed strangely quiet. Not because the celebration had stopped, Because Ethan's world had narrowed to a single moment, a single realization. The grief was still there. It probably always would be, but grief no longer controlled him. It no longer defined him. Love remained, purpose remained, life remained. Shadow gently nudged Ethan's hand. The old dog sensed the tears immediately, as he always had. Ethan smiled, then knelt beside him, his forehead resting against the German shepherd's. She was right. Shadow's tail wagged slowly, as if he already knew. Maybe he did. Around them, the celebration continued. Veterans shared stories. Families laughed together. Children played beneath falling snow. The valley glowed with warmth. What had once been built on greed had become something else entirely. A place of healing, a place of belonging, a place where second chances lived. Ethan stood, looked across Black Hollow Ridge, and for the first time since Claire's death, the ache inside him felt lighter. Not gone, just lighter. The mountains stretched into the darkness, silent, beautiful, endless. Beside him stood a scarred German shepherd who had never stopped believing. Behind him stood an entire community rebuilt from hope. Above him snow drifted through the night sky, and somewhere beyond those clouds, a woman who had changed everything. Ethan smiled through tears, then looked toward the people gathering around the fire, toward the life waiting for him, toward tomorrow. And together, he and Shadow walked forward. The end. If you believe it's never too late to rebuild a life, comment 1 below. And if you've ever had to start over after losing everything, comment 0. We'd love to hear your story. Sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones who never fall, but the ones who keep getting back up. If stories about justice, loyalty, and second chances speak to you, subscribe and join us for the next journey across the American heartland.